Well, I thought I would talk about three principles and how they have application to parenting. I have two children. My daughter now is a grown up, and my son is grown up, but my daughter was 14 years old when I first started to learn this, and my son was 9 years old. And so when I went to my very first training in the three principles, very quickly I started having insights that helped me with my parenting. So I thought I would share some of the things that I have learned about how learning about the principles can be very helpful with your parenting. One of the first insights that I had is a very basic insight in terms of the principles, is that since we're always thinking, there's always thinking going on in us, and every thought we have immediately is brought to life by consciousness and turned into a feeling. Well, that's very, very simple, but I tell you, I did not know, even though I had my doctorate in psychology, I did not know that feelings always and only came from thought. I thought, as I think is pretty common, that for all parents, at times you think that it's your kids that are upsetting you or making you anxious or frustrated or angry. So when I started to learn that there was only one source for my feeling, and that was thought, I started to catch myself and notice times when I was feeling impatient or bothered or frustrated or angry. I started to notice when I was feeling that, and it was so helpful to see that as soon as I realized that the feelings that I had while I was parenting were coming from thought and not from my kids, they were off the hook. I no longer was holding them responsible for making me feel the way I did. And I tell you, that's such a simple little thing, but it made a really big difference in terms of how I interacted with my kids. It helped me to take responsibility for my own feelings. It helped me to see that they were coming from my own thinking and not from my kids. So it separated that very powerfully, so that I no longer saw them as having anything to do with my feelings. The way I was thinking about what they were doing was what was creating my feeling in the moment. The second thing that I had, the second insight that I had, came pretty quickly, pretty soon after that. I just started to notice that when I realized in the moment that my feeling was coming from thought, that it was being created from my thinking, that itself would throw me more into the present moment. I would tend to disengage from the thinking that I was doing that was creating that feeling. In other words, it wasn't long before that thinking that I had been doing, when I would stop thinking the thoughts that were creating that feeling, and they would start to dissipate, or they would fade away. And as they faded away, which is what happens naturally for us in the present moment, when we're really just being present, all of that mind chatter begins to quiet down. As soon as it would quiet down, my feeling would shift. I wouldn't feel so upset, or I would feel calmer. I would have much more clarity and perspective. And the third insight that I had was, when I'm in a calm state of mind or a clear state of mind, I'm an open channel for new thinking. I'm an open channel for thoughts coming to mind that help me, that are responsive to the moment, and that would help me be able to respond to my kids better. That I found out pretty quickly that I had all the common sense I needed to be a good parent. Common sense, very simply, is just new thinking that occurs when your mind is clear that helps you make sense. It's common sense. It comes from this deeper common ground, comes from deep within our mind. It emerges and it helps us make sense of things. So to put all that together, as I learned the principles, I started to recognize the feelings that I had of impatience and bother and frustration and anger. I started recognizing those feelings as coming from my thinking rather than my kids. That would wake me up to the present moment. It would be much easier for me then to just let those thoughts go and drop those thoughts that were continuing to create that feeling. My head would clear, and every time my head would get clear of that thinking, they would be replaced by thoughts that would create a better feeling and more common sense. It was the most it changed my parenting overnight. Before I learned this, when I would get upset with my kids, I would often try really hard to address the problem right away. So I'd walk in the house, I'd see my son had left his clothes and his books and his shoes and his hat and his coat and everything all over the floor. And my initial thought would be that I would get, oh, Ben, come on, how many times have I talked to you about this? How come you can't just put your stuff away when you come in the house? Why do you have to leave it all over every place? And if I didn't realize that the feeling I was in was coming from thought, it would be very easy for me to right away say something to him from that feeling. So I go, Ben, come on. How many times do I have to talk to you about this? And as soon as he would hear my voice of upset, he would either get defensive, or he'd get argumentative, or he'd get really quiet, but get really upset himself. And it sounds like a simple little shift, but now I'm walking in the house after I had started learning about these principles. I see all of the stuff on the floor. I have the same thoughts and the same feelings and the same reaction. And yet, when I'm fortunate enough to realize that that feeling is just coming from my own thinking, it's like snaps me awake. It wakes me back up to the present moment. And that thinking falls away. And at a certain point, sometimes immediately, sometimes a little while later, my feeling shifts and I'm calmer. And as soon as I'm calm, I'm able to very effectively parent. And I think this is true of any parent, is any parent, when they're in a calm state of mind, whatever comes out of their mouth works out really nicely. And when parents are upset, what comes out of their mouth tends to stir things up and innocently make things worse.